Hello, and welcome to Unit 6, in which we start our localization project. In this project initiation stage, we have received source files, which learners can download from the Moodle area, and we will use these to calculate and prepare a quote for our client. We'll consider the CAT tool features used during this workflow stage, which comprises project creation, importing the necessary project files into the CAT tool, and performing a statistical analysis. Learners should replicate this process in each of the recommended cloud-based tools in order to compare and contrast the process and output of each. The help files and tutorial videos available for each tool will provide you with step-by-step demonstrations, and learners should become accustomed to seeking out such training resources as required. However, a list of appropriate resources is included with the guided exploration questions. Learners are encouraged to take sufficient time to explore the user interface of each tool to familiarize themselves with the location of the project, the language resources, and the features covered in each unit presentation. In these presentations, I will be working with files in my language pair, English and Spanish, and you should choose to do similar. It is recommended that learners use the English source files for their project, so please now download the relevant localization materials from the current unit section on the Moodle course page. Quiz questions for this unit can also be downloaded from the Moodle area, and these should be used to guide your exploration of the tools. When you are satisfied with your exploration of the recommended tools, please proceed to complete the quiz questions via the Moodle course page link. On successful completion of the quiz, learners will earn their DigiLink mini badge. A further task for this stage will be to export the statistical analysis to a spreadsheet and to use this to produce a formatted quote to send to our client. An example of a formatted quote can be found under the Resources tab. In our practice project scenario, our client has sent us their source files and a translation memory in a TMX format and has asked us to prepare a quote for services. The project involves a PowerPoint presentation and an HTML file, so some desktop publishing work will likely be required in order to adjust the formatting and layout once the translation has been completed. Our client has provided us with a translation memory, which we can import into our project. However, had this not been the case, we could have created some resources using the alignment process, and this process will be discussed in more detail later in the presentation. Localization projects, particularly those with many target languages, tend to generate a large number of files which must be managed effectively if the project is to stay on target. It is extremely important to design a clear folder structure to manage these files from the outset of the project. Storing files on a computer's desktop without a good folder structure will quickly lead to problems of lost files. The image on the left of our screenshot shows a very basic folder structure for organizing each element of the project resources, where files are grouped together according to their type and use and gathered into a single project folder. The image on the right shows a more developed folder structure used to manage a project with multiple target languages, which can be grouped separately so that files can be easily stored and retrieved. This type of folder structure might be used within a software localization project. As we'll be working with practice files, why not pause this presentation and take some time to create a simple folder structure on your computer so that you're ready to start work in a CAT tool. The basic folder structure shown in the slide should suffice for our project. However, you can structure your folders as required. In order to start working in the chosen CAT tool, the project manager must first create or add new project file. This project file is an index file which links together the user's defined project settings and all the other relevant project files, such as the source files, language resources, reference materials, and target language files. When the user creates their new project, they are asked to provide information to define the project settings, such as the project languages and the working direction of these projects, the location of the source files, and other language resources, such as the translation memories and term bases to be used, and they might also choose to add in client metadata, such as the subject, domain, and perhaps a due date for the project. The CAT tool uses file filters to enable the import of its supported file types. In the Document Import dialog box, the user selects the documents to be imported, and the CAT tool will import these using the default settings. However, the default settings do not always capture all of the translatable information, and users can therefore adjust the import settings in order to instruct the CAT tool to import other elements which are not included in the default. As we saw in our file types interaction in Unit 3, these modifiable settings are different for each file type. In our project, when we import the PowerPoint slides from our client, we want to instruct the CAT tool to include the master slides, and, with the HTML file, we may need to force the tool to use the Unicode encoding. When importing the source file, the CAT tool will automatically segment the document. This process automatically subdivides the text into smaller units for translation. The smallest text segment is usually considered to be the sentence. However, headings or list items are also considered to be segments. The CAT tools delineate segments by identifying end-of-segment markers, such as a paragraph mark, a sentence end mark, such as a full stop or a question mark, or a cell end when working with spreadsheets. Before importing a document, it should first be opened in its native format and checked to see whether it contains any carriage returns or paragraph marks within sentences, any forced hyphenations, any tables created with tabs, any revision marks, or any index markers in the middle of words or sentences. In cases where the document does not import well using the default segmentation rules, then these can usually be customized to include additional end-of-segment markers, to select whether segmentation should be done on the basis of sentences or whole paragraphs. Separate files can also be created to specify exceptions to segmentation separators for words such as doctor or e.g., where the full stop should not constitute an end-of-segment marker. CAT tools use a database approach, whereby the translation memory segments and the terms are stored in separate databases accordingly. When starting a project, either new databases must be created, or previously created ones must be selected to use with that project. These databases are able to store not only translated segments and terms, but also metadata, data which describes the data, such as creation dates, modification dates, and user information, which the CAT tool will automatically generate, as well as customizable fields as required, such as the client name or subject area, amongst others. In our screenshot, the translation memory is open in MemoQ, and the metadata for each segment is displayed to the right, in the highlighted red box. Users should think carefully about the type of metadata to be stored, as this is valuable information which can be used for filtering purposes. The specified criteria can be used to create smaller subsets of a large translation memory, for example when client-specific translation units may be exported from a master translation memory, or to focus on a particular section of the database for translation lookup, for example, looking up translation units which have been modified after a particular date or assigned for use with a particular client. They can also be used to make global changes to the databases, for example, updating a certain term in the translation units connected to a particular project or client. Our client has provided us with an already populated translation memory to use in our project. In this instance, our task will be to import the TMX file provided into our chosen cat tool. With some tools, it is necessary to create first an empty translation memory, and then to import our TMX data. With others, it is possible to import the TMX file directly. It's also advisable to consider the way in which newly translated segments should be stored. The client's translation memory may initially be used as a reference and not for update, so the settings can be adjusted to make the memory read-only. The project manager would create an empty translation memory and attach this to the project for storing project-related translations. The project-specific memory can be merged with the client's own memory at the end of the project, once the translations have been checked and approved by the client. We have not been provided with a terminology database, so we will create an empty term base to which we will add terms as we progress. Once the project settings have been defined, the language resources created, and the source files imported, the project manager may save these settings as a template. In cases of data corruption or loss, the project template can be used to quickly recreate a replica of the original project settings. Once the project is created, the project manager runs an analysis to produce a statistical report. In analysis, the contents of the translation memory is leveraged or compared to the content of the source files. This provides a statistical assessment of how much original translation work is needed and how useful the translation memory will be in returning matches. The analysis also gives an indication of the similarities within the source documents, known as internal repetitions, and for projects containing multiple files, some tools provide a further analysis of cross-file repetitions. In projects with a high degree of internal or cross-file repetition, the translator will translate the repeated segment the first time it occurs, and the cat tool will automatically insert the translation in the following matching segments. This is known as auto-propagation. Each cat tool uses its own algorithms for counting words and assessing comparisons with the translation memory, and the output can vary from one tool to another, as each tool differs in the way that translatable elements are extracted and counted. Each tool then produces a slightly different analysis of the same files, as can be seen in the two analyses in our screenshots. The source files from our practice project have been imported using the default segmentation settings, and we can see that MemoQ has counted 1,742 words, while Trados has counted 1,474 words in the same source files. This statistical report can then be used to plan the costing and timescale of the project. The report presents a table showing the total number of words in each file analysed, which is broken down further into the number of segments and the number and types of matches found in the translation memory. Translations are then charged on a per unit rate, where the unit is very often the word. However, different units are used in different markets. For example, in Italy, the unit tends to be the cartella, which is roughly a page of around 250 to 400 words. When working with character-based languages, such as Chinese, Japanese or Korean, the unit will be the character, which may be equivalent to 3, 4 or more words. The project manager uses the analysis report to compile the client's quote, and the breakdown of translation memory matches is usually included along with it for the client's reference. Localization agencies often use a tiered pricing system in relation to matches from the translation memory. Where the match is an exact or context match, a discounted price may be offered for the translation of these segments. Fuzzy matches and no matches may still be priced at the full per word rate. Some CAT tools, such as MemSource, will allow the user to store their tiered pricing percentage discounts within the tool, and will apply these automatically to analyses carried out within the tool. The project manager uses the analysis report to apply the agency's discount rates to calculate the overall cost of translation and revision and review. The analysis report can be exported to a spreadsheet-compatible format, such as tab text or comma-separated values, which can be used to automatically calculate the overall cost of the project. For revision, the reviser usually receives their full per-unit rate, whereas the translator's rate varies with match type. Revisers and reviewers often charge by the hour or per 1,000 words for their services, so it's important to understand how much work is involved in each stage. We can assume that in general translators will process around 2,500 words per day for non-technical texts. This may be lower for technical ones, which may require further research. And revisers may handle between 7,500 and 10,000 words per day. According to CantanMT.com, producers of the Cantan machine translation plugin, the average daily output for post-editing machine translation is around 7,000 words a day. However, it must be mentioned that this is only approximate, as daily output will be affected by the quality of the MT output, and whether it requires a light or a substantial post-edit. As we saw in Lim Bowker's article on translatability in Unit 3, an internationalized text is likely to be more machine translation ready, therefore may only require a light post-edit, whereas without proper internationalization of language, post-editing will likely take longer. So we can calculate how long our project will take to complete. For example, if the project is 10,000 words to translate, we can use the following calculation. If we take the total number of words to be translated and divide this by 2,500, this will give us the number of days that the translation will take to complete. If we take the number of words to be revised and we divide this by 7,500, this will give us the number of days needed for the revision stage. So the total number of days needed for the translation and revision stage can be calculated by adding together the two former calculations. The project manager may split large source files between multiple translators in order to speed up the translation stage or to meet a tight turnaround time. For example, splitting a 10,000 word source text between 5 translators would mean that it would be possible to translate the whole text in 1 day, as opposed to 5, so long as time is included within the quality assurance stage to ensure that the different styles of writing are married together. The project manager must also take account of the amount of time required to rebuild the translated files into their original format, and the time that may be required to apply desktop publishing and or any functionality testing which may be required. Once these calculations are complete and the quote is ready, it is sent to the client for approval, and no more work is done on the project until such approval is received. As our client was able to provide both the original source files and their corresponding translated files from a previous project, we are able to recycle these using a feature in CAT tools known as alignment, whereby the tool segments the source and target texts and pairs together the corresponding segments to recreate the translation units. Translators or translation customers often have available a large amount of translated material which they may want to convert into a translation memory database. Therefore, translation memory systems contain this feature for aligning existing translations. Alignment is the process of comparing a source text and its translation, matching the corresponding segments, and binding them together as translation units in a translation memory. The alignment process enables translators to create translation memories from the source and target texts of previous translation projects, provided that these texts are in an electronic form. In order to perform an alignment, it is essential to first determine that the source and target texts are suitable for alignment. This means that the source and target must have the same file format. For instance, you should avoid aligning a Word document with an HTML file. It's also essential to specify the file format and the source and target languages. Select the source and target language files to be aligned, and then follow the instructions of the individual alignment tool. The result of this process is a side-by-side display of source and target segments. In this display, you can interactively correct misalignments, which can be caused by segmentation problems in the source and/or target texts, by inconsistent formatting between the source and target texts, or by non-one-to-one correspondences between source and target texts, for example, a 2-to-1 or a 1-to-2. With a standalone tool, once the segments have been matched up, the results can be reviewed in order to ensure that matches are accurate before storing them in the translation memory. The resulting translation memory matches can either be added to an existing memory or used to populate a new empty one. In cloud-based tools, the user has much less control over the alignment matches, as the matches are made behind the scenes, with little or no option to correct the result. Some tools offer an option to download the output to Excel or another editable format in order to correct the matches before uploading it back to the cloud translation memory. Alignment is intended to be a quick process and a way of reusing previous translations. However, the matches produced need to be reviewed and corrected manually. In this screenshot, we can see that the alignment has gone awry, and 2 source segments have been inaccurately matched with 1 target segment. This is known as a 2-to-1 correspondence, and the user can manually break the lines between segments and reconnect them correctly. For documents containing heavy formatting, it may be advisable to strip away the formatting, working with a plain text or rich text format before aligning the files in order to enhance the accuracy of matches produced. CAT tools recognize parameters such as punctuation and paragraph marks as the end of a segment when breaking up the text. If these marks differ significantly between the source and target texts, then it may be necessary to substantially correct the links between the segments in order to create a 1-to-1 correspondence. The image here shows an instance where the punctuation has been added to the target text, creating a 1-to-2 correspondence in the translation memory. This can be corrected by merging the 2 target segments in order to preserve the match. Care should be taken not to spend more time than necessary to achieve perfect alignment. The alignment tool is a productivity tool, and its goal is to populate a translation memory database as quickly as possible with valid translation segments, not to achieve perfect alignment of all source and target texts. Therefore, quite often, the most pragmatic approach is to ignore complex misalignments. Some tools include a free alignment feature for creating translation memories. but in the absence of one, it's possible to use the LF Aligner, a separate free tool which can be downloaded from the SourceForge website. Your task is to use the project files provided to create a project in each of the suggested cloud-based tools and to import the resources provided. Explore the user interface using the guided exploration questions and use the list of training resources provided to enable you to carry out an analysis on the source files. You should take note of how the word count in each tool compares. Is it the same as that seen in our presentation examples? Does it differ between each of the cloud-based tools? Your final task to complete this unit will be a multiple-choice quiz based on the guided exploration questions. This concludes our Unit 6 presentation on project initiation. Please click Next to end this presentation and to return to the Moodle course page.